Bobby Manning here. Welcome back. Another live garden report. I think every other member of the panel fell asleep before the completion of the Kristaps Porzingis deal. I stayed up, want to prepare some more draft coverage for tomorrow, which is going to be all the more pertinent now. Celtics get the Porzingis trade done, pick up a couple picks in the process, and trade Marcus Smart to Memphis. Memphis steps up as the third team. They had a deadline of midnight to get this done. I'm sure Porzingis wanted to land on a new trade team and retain those bird rights, retain the ability to do an extension. So he keeps that midnight deadline in place. And over the course of about an hour here, Celtics had to make a decision. Couldn't find a destination for Malcolm Brogdon. I'm sure didn't want to trade future draft capital to move off that contract. And so Washington had interest, as Adrian Wojnarowski reported, that the Wizards wanted Tyus Jones. They had conversations on Jones. Jones felt like, with the reporting over the last couple of days here, wanted to find a new spot. And it all comes together. This is crazy. Marcus Smart, a Memphis Grizzly now. Porzingis lands in Boston. They get their big three, Tatum, Brown, and Smart, but at a heavy cost here. And the Celtics do pick up some valuable pieces here in terms of draft capital. They flip 35 to Memphis, or Washington rather, and I believe pick up, want to look at the exact pick here that they ended up getting. They moved to, what it ended up being, 25th, if you can update that. It's actually the 25th pick in this draft that they're receiving from Memphis. So they move up about 10 spots. Must be someone they love here. I'm about to, right after this, start digging deep on who that could be. Obviously, the guys I was eyeing at 35 are a little different from what's going to be there at 35. But let's start with Smart. An all-timer. An all-time divisive Celtics, certainly. And many, year in and year out, wanted to see him potentially move somewhere. Blame game often after tough losses went on Smart. Shot selection infuriated fans in certain moments. And I think at times he probably rubbed shoulders the wrong way with teammates, the organization. I still look back at that Philadelphia series when he said, Joe's getting killed, and rightfully so. He spoke his mind at every turn. Never held back. An intense personality. Seemed to anoint himself the leader of this group at times, for better and for worse. Sometimes think it went over well. Sometimes I don't think it went over as well. But the Celtics stuck with him every step of the way up until now. And why? A couple things make this tough to swallow for me. Number one, we mentioned it earlier. We did a live show earlier on the Porzingis fit. I think we pretty much hit on everything on that front. It's a sensational fit defensively. You're going to be able to play big now. I think you're almost certainly bringing Brogdon off the bench still here, but we'll see. Your best defensive lineup, your best starting lineup, I think, is going to be that double big combination of Horford and Porzingis. The Celtics obviously love him enough to even engage on an extension here, and I'm sure they still will. It could be 2 years, $77 million. I don't know about that. I don't love the idea of extending him. Injury history, seeing how this fit goes, all the rest, and the price of this team at that point. And think about it, the final details of this trade. Smart goes out. That was the cheapest and most sustainable of your guards, I felt like. That's why I thought there was no way he was gonna move. Signed for about $18 million a year through 2026. So you had 3 years of him. Your best defender at that position overall, your most versatile defender at that position, maybe took a little bit of a step back this year, but played through injuries and such. And then you're gonna have to make a tough decision on in a year now, and, within 2 years, you're looking at even tougher decisions. It's gonna be a extension eligibility for White at that spot. Porzingis, I mean, that $77 million extension locks him in for over $35 million a year for 3 years. And so how do you balance that with a Jaylen Brown supermax contract? This trade brings them about $5 million under that second apron. So now that mid-level exception becomes a little more difficult to use at this point. And I don't know who you would have even got with it, but it was a way to replace Grant at the very least, and Grant Williams coming back, forget about it. That's not happening now. And I don't think it was happening in the previous version of this trade, but it's certainly not happening now. So maybe you can get a sign and trade done there. Again, I don't think you're getting a ton back in a Grant sign and trade. So here's the cost of this deal. And yes, you do pick up a couple firsts here, and I'll get to those in a second. Marcus Smart, Mike Muscala, and Gallinari go to Washington. I'm sure that's not killing anybody, but a couple of rotation guys you're sending out potentially who could have been in line to steal some back end minutes there, but they played the same position as Porzingis is coming in at. So neither here nor there. You send out 35, so you're only moving up 10 spots. You're not just picking up an extra pick here in this draft. And what's the other piece going out here? It's theoretically. Oh, well, Brogdon's staying in this case. That's the other thing. So yes, he's staying here. So you give up quite a bit here to get a couple picks. We'll see who they draft. Porzingis comes in here with a couple other centers, so that center spot's a little more packed now. And you would have to think Pritchard's staying at this point, unless they end up outletting him somewhere here. So I still want to see the final picture. I still want to see how this is all going to come together. But earlier, I said I like it, I don't love it. Just on the surface of bringing in Porzingis, a player who I'm still not certain how he's going to fit offensively. As of now, and I have to see how everything shakes out here, I don't like this. I don't. You losing a piece I think helped you more than hurt you in Marcus Smart, a guy who I think when you put the ball in his hands, improved the offense with his playmaking. Big part of that 21-5 start this year, his playmaking and his amount of time on the ball. If you look at the time Smart spent on the ball early in the season versus later, after he got injured around that All-Star break, it went back to Tatum. The shooting's going to improve here across the board. You know, you're going to have more guys on the floor who shoot better than Smart, who's capable of shooting, but he did shoot 36% from three in the playoffs. So shooting wasn't the issue with him in the postseason. And you're going to be playing big more often too. So how does this shake out? I got to see it. And I got to see who they're going to draft here. The Warriors pick's pretty good. You know, the way it's looking for that team, next year's Warriors pick could end up being a premium pick. And I have to look at the protections on that, because I do believe they had some minor protections, not something that's probably going to impact the Celtics, unless the Warriors really bottom out here. But that 2024 Warriors pick, which went over to Memphis in the Andre Iguodala trade, is protected top 4. So if the Warriors end up with a top 4 pick next year, they'll keep it, and then it will move to 2025 top 1 protected, and then unprotected in 2026 if it ends up being that number 1 pick in 2025. So, Celtics get a nearly unprotected pick from the Warriors here. I get it, and Woj was pointing at the CBA. I don't know how you point at that when you're about to have 3 guys making over $35 million a year here, and you're pushing much closer to the second apron for this year in particular. I almost feel like you're gonna be a second apron team this year, depending on how things shake out, but we'll see. They might just be able to sit under that line and fill out the roster with minimum guys, and uh, your draft pick's gonna come in at, a couple million here, so you might be a second apron team this year, for better or for worse. I obviously don't think that's as big of a deal as some of the other stuff here, but that is another thing that you have to account for here in this trade. So the Celtics obviously love Kristaps Porzingis. They made an agonizing decision here, I'd have to imagine. I'm sure you know how it goes in front offices. There's different people, different voices. I'm sure they debated up until the final minute on this thing. And ultimately, Brad Stevens, who you've heard through reports at different points, probably came close to pulling the trigger on moving Smart. They've considered it at different points, I'd have to imagine. But all along, he kept coming back and kept retaining that starting spot in the rotation. And that is the one thing I'll acknowledge here that I have to think they did this for, is that almost everybody on this roster showed flexibility over the last couple of years here. Brogdon going to the bench, White starting, sitting last year, Rob starting, sitting. Horford's largely started throughout, but Marcus, you always had that thing. Oh, is Marcus going to sit in the fourth quarter? Can you move him to the bench if you acquire this point guard? How's he going to feel about this? We were always asking that question. And I think that was a difficult thing for this team to manage with into the future, particularly if they do go out and get another guard now. And I have to think some more about who they could potentially target at that position if they do want to pad their depth once again there or utilize someone else. But that, to me, if I have to acknowledge something here on the Smart front, that probably made things difficult from a team building and a team management perspective, particularly on the rookie head coach and Joe Mazzulla, who I can't even remember a single moment they put Smart on the bench and closed the game with White and Brogdon, which was incredibly effective duo last season. The numbers on that group were sensational. So you're potentially going to see those two start together. I'd imagine that they're going to start games big, like I said earlier. Bring Horford, in the starting lineup at that 4 spot again. Probably have a quick hook and go smaller. And then, rotate from there. And when you do bring Horford back in, whether it's next to Rob or whether it's next to Porzingis, he's playing at that 4 spot. So I think that's how they're going to go here, at least with the roster that they have in place right now. I also have to take a look at the amount of roster spots they have here because they're obviously sending out 3 guys and bringing in 1. Blake's still a free agent. You're going to lose Grant here, it looks like, though you could be bringing back somebody in a sign-and trade for him. So you're going to need to fill roster spots here somehow, of course, as well, while right up against that second apron time, which I don't think they look at as a big deal here. But a surprising move, a stunning move, really. I did not see Smart moving this offseason. And when push came to shove, and they had to decide between walking away from Porzingis and bringing back last year's roster in large part, or moving Smart and pulling Memphis into this deal and appeasing Washington with a Tyus Jones, they decided to separate with Marcus Smart. So Got a little bit more here. I'll dive in a little bit to those picks and that Porzingis dynamic, which to me is the other reason I have a little bit of pause with this move. But first, let's give a shout out to one of our sponsors here. Trip to the grocery store, skip the chopping, prepping, cleaning up. Just get these prepackaged ingredients.
Yep.
Heat it up, enjoy, and you're back outside to soak in the summer. That's what it's all about.
And we don't have time to cook. It's the summer. You get out of work.
America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit.
You get out of work, the sun's shining, you get a workout in, you run home, you eat quick, you go back out, you have a couple drinks with your friends. This is the summer. No one's slaving around in the kitchen for 2 hours, trying to, whip this up and whip that up.
You should have seen the lengths I went on friggin', I don't even want to talk about it.
With what? Factor meal? With your meals?
Pies?
Yeah, no, on Father's Day, the amount of friggin' cooking I had to do. Disaster.
You had to cook your own meals?
Yeah.
Is that what you
Look at that.
John, is that you?
Factor meals. Factor shakes.
Oh, we got Factor shakes.
Oh, they got shakes?
Yeah, guys, come on.
I didn't even
Get
know.
with it.
I knew they had it, but they look good. I'm not a green beans guy personally, but
Those bars are great too. You need something quick.
Anyway, go
Factor
check it out.
meals
It's
on the
America's
go.
#1 ready-to-eat meal kit.
toss
So
it in the
go get
bag on
some.
your way to the gym. Bob.
Factormeals.com/garden50. Get 50% off your first box.
All right. Shout out to Factor Meals. So I'm going to jump into a couple mock drafts here and see what's potentially available at 25. I'm going to have some more videos rolling out into tomorrow. Man, it's going to be a long couple of days here of who the mock drafts are calling for at that 25 spot. We'll see if KOC updated his yet. I'd imagine he did not with the Celtics picking at 25, but he had Memphis selecting Brandon Podzimski, the guard out of Santa Clara, a guy who has risen just about as fast as anyone else in this class, a great shooter, a ball mover, and a guy who can just rack up three-pointers off the catch in a big way. Vicini, whose mock draft or big board here isn't really looking at teams in particular. His has, can't pull it up quick enough here. The Athletic one, consolidating this as a whole, had at 25 Olivier Maxence Prosper out of Marquette. More of a perimeter player, it looks like. ESPN has at 25 Ryan Rupert out of New Zealand. And again, these are pointed toward a Memphis perspective where they're trying to fill those guard spots with John Morant out. And that's, of course, why Memphis got aggressive here in acquiring Marcus Smart, a guy who really fits their identity as well, as a matter of fact. And Hollinger was looking at his rankings here, coming in at 25. Chris Murray out of Iowa, brother Keegan Murray. Older player, good two-point shooter. Guy who had more pedigree, I feel like, coming into this draft. He's dropped a little bit. And who are some other names floating around that 25 spot? Nick Smith, Derek Whitehead, Noah Clowney. I saw his name floating around in the chat. And then some of the other names I was floating around at 35, like Maxwell Lewis, good wing. It's a name I actually really like at 25. You seemed like the guy most out of reach at 35 among the names that I was starting to favor. And Kobe Jones, another ball handler, another guard in that mix, if they are trying to supplant Peyton Pritchard. Maybe that's a guy you look at that spot, but bit of a non-shooter. One thing I've noticed in this draft across the board in the later stages is that there really isn't a ton of shooting. at these spots. There's some great athletes. There's some great physical profiles. But, man, these guys struggled to shoot later in this draft. And some of them, like an Andre Jackson, didn't hit a three with a defender within 6 feet of him. So I don't think you're looking for that, especially with the style of basketball that you're trying to play here, particularly from the ball handlers. You don't want guys who aren't able to shoot. And I think Peyton Pritchard probably has an edge on a lot of these guys who aren't able to shoot at this spot. J.D. Davison, people are excited about him. I don't see him capturing a roster spot here. So, if they can bring him back on a two-way, great, and continue developing him. But I wouldn't say he's about to slide into the guard rotation with Marcus Smart gone here behind the other three. So maybe you do need another body in here. But there's obviously something they like at 25 that made them jump in here and get it. So, man, 1,700 of you in here. This is a big deal. And it just shows how divisive Smart was. I'm seeing people in the chat furious that he's gone, hating this trade. I see people saying, come on, Bobby, stop being so emotional. This makes so much sense. He had to go. It was time. And this is basically a summation of the Celtics postgame show that I've been on since 2017. Some people can't stand Marcus, and some people loved him, and that split pretty much continued through the ups and downs all the way through this June 2023 when he finally got traded in a unceremonious way, I'd say. This is sudden. This was an on-the-fly decision. This was a scramble to get this trade done, keep it alive. And I'd have to imagine an agonizing decision to move on from a player who, I get it, it's cliche, the heart and soul, the leader, the captain, whatever you want to call it. Well, this team didn't need captains, in Smart's words, when they went to award those under Ime Udoka. Listen, we know we've been following Smart for 9 years. You know the story at this point. An incredible, versatile defender who, when he picked up injuries and went through ups and downs in the middle of the season, sometimes that slipped. We saw it in 2021. We saw it at times this year. And at his best, could be a game changer on that end. There were a few games in the playoffs where I thought he just took over, and you saw some shades of that Defensive Player of the Year from the 2022 season. 2022, phenomenal. At the point of attack, the quarterback, the switcher who made that system roll on that end of the floor. And he thrived communicating, defending bigs when necessary, boxing out, calling out stuff. He just did it all on that end. And that team drove to the finals on defense. And as he loved to say, he moved to point guard. He had the ball in his hands more often. He made good decisions to set up his teammates on that run. And I feel like with that ankle injury against the Heat in the East Finals that carried over in the next year, that he re-injured a couple of times, he had more of an uneven season this year. And, he's a guy who was heading into his 9th year here. It's been a long time that he's been on this team. He developed a certain cachet in the room. And I think guys looked to him in ways that I think, Tatum and Brown are going to have to take on that leadership role now. And this is what we got to get to here, is that it's more and more as other guys exit this room, guys who these two played with for a long time and looked up to, your Haywards and Kembas and Tices, and Horford's still here, but he's probably going to be taking a backseat to Porzingis to a large degree. It's on Brown and Tatum to start making this work. And yes, from a CBA perspective, no doubt the Supermax Brown's moving on to here is a massive factor. And you could make the argument that Porzingis is here as some level of insurance, that if you do need to move Brown in a year and split him up into a bunch of different role players like we've kicked around on this show, this gives you the ability to still maintain a second star on the team at that point. I would not love getting to that point, and that's going to have to include Porzingis staying long term, whether it's through an extension or in free agency next year. We'll see where that moves next, and I'm sure we'll figure that out in a short timeline here. July 6th is the date that Porzingis is eligible to sign that 2-year, $77 million extension. And then you're going to hear $295 million for Brown. And how sustainable does that become from a luxury tax perspective, from the penalties that you're going to incur long term, having 3 guys making that level of money? Tatum will start in 2025 making that $50 million annual salary. So you're going to have 3 massive salaries at the top of this roster. You're going to have Horford and White through 2025, which is good. You're going to have Rob through 2026, who takes a big step back in the rotation at the very least in this deal. I'd have to imagine not stepping forward into that starting role at the very least. And you saw in a aggressive, emphatic way, Brad Stevens make a move here and say, we need to solidify the front court with a star, with a guy making $30 million a year. And that's the other thing here is I'm generally, and this is a different kind of center, a more versatile one that's going to be an anchor on your defense legitimately, which I love, but I don't love playing a center $30 million. I just don't. You had Rob, you had Al, you had other guys who you could maybe mix in there. And that usually gets most teams by in the NBA, unless you have a Jokic or an Embiid. And this isn't to understate Porzingis' skill. I mean, he would have been all NBA this year if it wasn't for Domantas Sabonis, who, another center that's going to be making high amounts of money in coming years, has some limitations that prevented the Kings from beating the Warriors in the first round this year. Porzingis is going to have some limitations when it comes to playing small ball lineups. If a team goes 5 out against him, I wonder if he's going to be able to stay on the floor. And the usage is the biggest thing. There's, the personality, which is going to be a challenge here at times. I'd have to imagine he's a tough personality. But on the floor is the real question. A guy who's been a 30% usage guy for a lot of his career. Can he scale that back? Can he move toward more catch and shoot situations and playing off the ball and moving in a way that's going to get this offense rolling? You lose a playmaker here. I don't know how you feel about Smart, but there's no question he was one of the higher level playmakers on this team. And yes, you feel good about White stepping into a starting role and playing well, and you feel good about Brogdon hitting shots alongside him or playing a second unit point guard role. But you're short one more guy at that spot. The ball is going to be in Brown's hands a little bit more in those second units without Smart able to stagger into those lineups with him. Maybe you put it in Brogdon's hands in those spots, but that's the other question we have to ask here is, will Brogdon be ready for opening day, for training camp? There's still no word on that surgery, still mulling it over according to The Athletic here, what kind of treatment he's going to get on that arm injury. But the Clippers backed out of that trade because he was hurt earlier today. The reporting on Woj's end that the Celtics pushed them out of it because there's just too much hesitation and they need to get this done. But there was obviously some pause on the Clippers' end in terms of taking back Brogdon. And now Brogdon's here to stay. 2 years, $22 million a year. Incredible shot making last year. Playmaking. He didn't get to play with the ball in his hands a ton. Had some great stretches as a playmaker. Had some lows in that area as well. And defensively, statistically, he did not play well on that end this year. Needs to improve as a isolation defender. And I think grow more comfortable in using that voice. You didn't hear him publicly, at least, pointing out what this team needed to improve on, where this team needed to play more consistently until that very end against the Heat in the East Finals, where he started emphasizing defense, which, he needed to start leading by example on that end a little bit more, given the production he played on that end throughout the year. And, I'm not going to blame him for the East Finals performance on the offensive end. He was hurt. But how's that impact going forward? How's that impact him going forward, rather? It's a key question out of this deal when you were ready to move on from Brogdon, and now he's coming back, and you have to think, be a part of this team going forward. Guard, you're looking good. Center, certainly solidified with this trade. Wing, I'm sure that's what they're going to try to address with the pick here, as well as, if they can, in free agency. The rookie scale on 25, I'd have to imagine isn't going to be massive, but you do pick up a 2-year guarantee here on a first-round pick. Let's see if the Spotrac number is updated here. That number 25 pick's going to come in at $2.6 million next year, so about half that mid-level. If you're not going to be able to use the mid-level here, which I don't think you're going to be able to. So you're going to be playing with a rookie at that roster spot where the mid-level would be. Grant, Gallinari probably out. Well, Gallinari's definitely out in this trade. Muscala heading out. So you have to fill those roster spots somehow. You know, how are you going to fill out this roster? Sam Hauser, great to still have him in the mix here. Luke Cornett's going to be that depth center with Muscala heading out the door, which, of course, I love to see. And aside from that, you know, maybe you do bring in Davison on a roster spot now. It's not something I anticipate them doing, but it is an option here now. You are left with, after this trade, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 roster spots filled without Justin Champagnie, but I'd imagine he's going to be gone. So let's call it 10 players now. Maybe you bring back Blake on a minimum. That's 11. Maybe you bring in JD. That's 12. Maybe you bring over Jawan Begarin. 13. And then the pick's obviously going to be one as well. So, yeah, that gets you to 14. And then you can leave a roster spot open here. And the tinkering might not be done. I would not rule out more activity here. I would not rule out looking at every option to utilize Brogdon's contract. I'd have to imagine Rob's not untouchable, given the front court that you have now, but he really is that great value contract on the roster now through 2026, now that Smart's gone. So, is this the complete picture? Can you bring in someone for Grant? Who are you going to pick at 25? And what veterans can you come into play here at a cheap price at the back end of the roster? Those are the big questions now. And given that you're going to move into this second apron now, how do you manage that going into the future? Given that that's going to start to cost you your ability to move some of these distant draft picks here. They move to the back of the second round, and now you're already feeling that effect of the mid-level here being out of use. So, wow, a stunner here, certainly. I'm not going to hang around for too much longer. Going to start diving into who the Celtics might pick at 25 tomorrow. But I will take some questions before I get out of here. There's 1,900 of you in the chat now, for for God's sake. So I might as well hang around a little bit longer and take some questions, because I've gotten my thoughts off my chest. I don't love this. I need to see it. How do you feel about it? What questions do you have? Right after this.
Media's Celtics coverage is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win.
All right. Final thoughts. Here we go. Let's talk about Smart. And I'm going to wait for some of your questions to roll in, but I think it's fair to look back and remember what this guy did, not only for the team, but for the community, for Boston. The moments, you're always going to remember him taking those pair of offensive fouls against James Harden in 2018. some of the charges he took, the dives to the floor. The one where he flew out of bounds throwing the ball off Kawhi. The guy lived on the hardwood. He really did, and put his body at risk constantly to secure loose balls, to grab offensive rebounds, and make an extra play, an extra effort. That's the kind of tone he set here, at least on the floor. And he played with a ton of fire, played in a divisive way, an aggressive way, but one where he carried no hesitation. And a lot of fans loved him. They did. You saw him run out on the floor, take those backward shots. When he'd hit him, the place would go nuts. Whenever he ran out on the floor before a game, fans would go pretty wild. And one thing about the Celtics, the NBA, is that the way guys come and go, or the level of stardom guys reach, Tatum and Brown in particular, there's not a strong connection with the community all the time. I don't want to understate Brown's involvement. Obviously, he's been involved with a number of colleges, and he's been at community basketball games in the summer and things like that. The juice store, of course, and the Seaport. So Brown has ingrained himself in the community to some degree at this level too. But whether it's the terminology, even when everyone was talking about the 0-3 comeback against the Yankees, a lot of guys rolled their eyes on this team, but Smart got that. I mean, 9 years in Boston, certain things he picked up just culturally here, and just the expectations of the city, the intensity of the city, the accountability that this city forces, on its athletes. And I think the desire, I think the city has a lot of time to see guys give back, and he really did. Jared wrote a great story, and I talked to him about it as well, about getting the smart carts in the hospitals here for the kids with cancer. It was an incredible story. I know he's about to do through his Young Game Changer Foundation a couple basketball tournaments here in early July. I'm sure he's still going to go through with it, still be there, and then move on to Memphis for training camp. There's just a level of involvement and connection to the city that Smart developed here over 9 years that was special. Maybe even developed a little bit of a Boston accent, I don't know, but it was pretty special seeing up close just how connected Smart was to the community. I mean, look at his Twitter account. Look at that location. It won't be there for much longer, but said greatest city in the USA. Man, he loved being here. He loved being a Celtic. The tradition of the team, again, something that's faded over time. Whether it's connecting with the legends. I mean, this guy had a strong relationship with Tommy Heinsohn. He'd sit down with Tommy before games and listen, hear him out, break some stuff down, get some advice from him. There weren't many other players, especially at that time, who were doing that. Guys were in and out the door. There wasn't a lot of meaning to being a Celtic to them. And so after the Celtics traded Garnett, Pierce, and moved on from that Big Three era and moved into rebuilding, Smart's the guy who developed the groundwork of what was going to come next with Isaiah, with those early Tatum Brown teams, playing alongside other star point guards who came in and playing his role, and learning to play within himself too. I mean, you can't deny he improved drastically with that over time, but things wear out. Guys don't stay on teams forever for a reason. And his voice at the top of this team clearly reached a point where they didn't consider him indispensable. And an opportunity like this to pick up a all-NBA level guy that they clearly really love here proved more important than keeping Smart around, even on a great contract, even as one of those leaders on this team, one of those vocal leaders. So You're losing a couple of those more vocal guys, those guys who try to hold teammates accountable, who try to make their voice heard, who tried to be that presence on this team. If Grant Williams is gone, he's another guy who tried to do that. I find it interesting that those guys are the ones who are out the door this offseason. But it's a talent league. I think they understand that. I think they're trying to play to the system Missoula wants to develop and the organization as a whole wants to play with here. Got a lot of shooting, got a lot of playmaking, got a lot of offense, an overwhelming amount of offense right here. But can they develop that defensive identity, even with a great anchor like Porzingis to do it? We'll see. He's going to have to stay healthy. He's going to have to reduce his usage. He's going to have to adjust to playing off Brown and Tatum. And still, the conversation we have over and over again, especially with Brown coming back on a supermax here. Brown and Tatum need to play together, need to lead together, and need to continue to improve their games to be able to lead on the floor, to be able to run this offense without turning it over, without growing stagnant in the late stages of games. It's critical. And so that's it. Wow. It's just a stunning trade here tonight. Celtics get it done. In case you don't know all the details, they get 2 first-round picks starting tomorrow. 25th overall they'll pick instead of 35th, so they will pick in the first round. They move up to that Memphis spot. 35 goes to Washington, as do Mike Muscala and Danilo Gallinari. Kristaps Porzingis will be a Celtic. No word yet on the extension here, the potential extension that's been kicked around for him. He's eligible on July 6th for a 2-year, $77 million extension. Malcolm Brogdon stays. That Clippers end of the deal fell apart and Memphis stepped up. Tyus Jones going to Washington. Marcus Smart going to Memphis to replace, for now, Ja Morant and eventually play alongside him when the suspension completes here. So as promised, I'm going to dive into some prospects for tomorrow. We're going to do a draft show tomorrow in well under 24 hours. And we're going to continue to pick up the pieces of this move here. Celtics acquire Kristaps Porzingis, trade Marcus Smart. We are brought to you by Athletic Greens. Head over to athleticgreens.com/garden for a year's supply of vitamin D, as well as 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. When you head over there, that's athleticgreens.com/garden. This has been a live breaking news edition of the Garden Report late night here. 1,800 of you sticking around. 8 years in Boston, finish for Marcus Smart. You really thought you'd see him raise a banner in Boston one day, maybe play here for his whole career, but he will wear that Memphis blue next year. Almost fitting. Remember Tony Allen going to Memphis in a similar manner after some great years in Boston. Smart's going to do the same and start writing his next chapter there, as will Kristaps Porzingis and Celtics green. Celtics obviously thrilled to acquire him here, as they will number 25 pick, and clearly they have their eyes on someone here who they really like moving up 10 spots. They had been looking at moving up according to multiple reports. So that's that. It's done. Those who want to see him gone, he's gone. Those who love them, tough to see Marcus Smart go, even while acquiring a talent like Porzingis. I'm Bobby Manning. This has been the Garden Report. And we will talk to you later today. Thanks for joining us late night here. And